Today's lesson is Sahara's sands flooded by rare rains. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Mike.
We are going to the Sahara Desert, which is that large desert in northern Africa that stretches from Egypt across Libya and Algeria and Tunisia all the way to Morocco and beyond, and then it extends quite south from there. But, of course, we usually think of the desert there as being a dry place where you might die because you don't bring enough water with you when you try to cross the desert. But recently, it has been flooded by rare rain. When rain happens, when it falls, we call that a rain or a rainfall, and it's been flooded. It has had a lot of rain falling on it, and that's unusual.
That is absolutely unusual, yes, because you're right, a desert, by definition, is just a place that gets very little rain. The Sahara, the Atacama Desert in Chile, I believe even the South Pole is actually a desert too, right? It rarely snows or, of course, never rains at the South Pole. It's too cold, but it also gets very little moisture, very little precipitation in the form of rain or snow. So when it's raining in the Sahara Desert, I guess this is just another sign that the Earth is not happy with us. The world is getting too warm too quickly, and it's starting to have some big effects on our planet and what we see around us, especially, of course, the weather. So let's find out all about this, how the Sahara Desert is maybe turning into the world's biggest beach. Sahara's sands flooded by rare rains. Heavy rainfall in the Sahara recently brought floods to one of the driest places in the world. Parts of the desert were filled with volumes of water not seen in decades. According to the Moroccan government, the rain over just 2 days exceeded yearly averages of around 250 millimeters in several areas. Taganit, a village near Morocco's capital, Rabat, received more than 100 millimeters of rainfall in a single day. Photographs taken by NASA satellites also showed water rushing back into the basin of Lake Iraqi, a famous lake bed that had been dry for 50 years.
大家好，第一部分介绍名词 rainfall， 它的意思是降雨或是降雨量。例如 Last year, the city got the most rainfall in its history. 去年的降雨量是该城市史上最多的。或者 This area gets a lot of rainfall this time of the year. 这个地区每年这时间的雨量很多。接着看到动词 exceed， 表示超出、超过或是超越。例如 The project costs exceeded the budget. 该项专案的成本超出了预算。或是 Eddie's grades at school exceeded his parents' expectations. Eddie 的学业成绩超出他父母的预期。下一个看到名词 satellite， 它的意思是人造卫星或是天文卫星。例如 We received this information by means of satellite. 我们是借由人造卫星收到这个资讯的。也可以说 These pictures of Mars came from a satellite. 这些火星的照片是经由卫星传过来的。继续介绍名词 basin， 表示盆地、洼地，也可以是流域的意思。可以说 The water from the natural spring empties into a basin at the bottom of the hill. 天然泉水流入山脚下的一个盆地。又或者说 The old man walked along the river basin in search of a good fishing spot. 那位老先生沿着河流流域走，想要寻找一个好的垂钓点。
Okay, let's talk about the first part of our lesson for today. It begins by saying, heavy rainfall in the Sahara recently brought floods to one of the driest places in the world. Okay, so rainfall, of course, is when rain falls. It's an instance in which rain falls. And yes, we've had rainstorms or just simply rain in the Sahara Desert. Okay, we usually don't think of rain falling in the desert. It does sometimes, of course, but we've had a lot of rainfall there. That's why we're describing it as heavy rainfall. Heavy rainfall, of course, is very well known to the good people of Taiwan. We've got typhoons and other storm systems that pass through, and drop lots of rain on various parts of the island. So yes, indeed, they have had heavy rainfall in the Sahara Desert recently. And if you have heavy rainfall, then you're going to have floods. That's when you have just too much water and you can't drive on the roads because they have turned into rivers and the water goes into people's homes and just causes all sorts of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of last year, we saw those terrible floods in Spain. Similar situation in some ways. Place that doesn't get a lot of rain, gets more than a normal amount of rain in a very short time, and the dry ground just can't handle it. It says parts of the desert were filled with volumes of water not seen in decades. I mean, just the idea of a desert having these sort of lakes being ponds and lakes, small bodies of water being created by rain is something I can't really imagine. I mean, we just don't see that. So parts of the Sahara were filled with volumes. A volume of water basically just means an unknown amount of water. All right, so a pool will have a volume of water. A big pool will have a larger volume. A small swimming pool will have a smaller, but it's just an amount of water that fills up that area. And these is volumes of water or amounts of water not seen in decades, not seen in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Of course, a decade is 10 years. When we say decades, we mean just a fairly long period of time. We're not saying centuries, which would be hundreds of years, but kind of thinking 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago was the last time we saw something like this. Now, this is all very worrying, so let's continue on with the article to find out exactly what happened, where, and maybe why.
Well, we're going to Morocco now. That, of course, is in northwestern Africa. According to the Moroccan government, the rain over just 2 days exceeded yearly averages of around 250 millimeters in several areas. Okay, wow. So they're reporting on the amount of rain there. They said in just 2 days, they had enough rain to equal the amount of rain they get in a normal year. So to exceed just means to go over a limit, to be too much. It just went over the yearly averages of around 250 millimeters in several areas. Okay, so 250 millimeters of rain is an amount of rain. It's a volume of rain. And a millimeter is just simply mm. Okay, if it's cm, it's centimeter. If it's km, it's a kilometer. But here we're talking about millimeters. And yes, that's they recorded in several areas of Morocco.
Very, very interesting. So yes, a whole year's worth of rain in just 2 days. That is definitely unusual. It says Taganit, a village near Morocco's capital, Rabat, received more than 100 millimeters of rainfall in a single day. So kind of on that average, a little bit less, 100 millimeters in 1 day. And remember, this is a very dry part of the world where this kind of thing just does not happen, especially at this time of year. Photographs taken by NASA satellites also showed water rushing back into the basin of Lake Iriki, a famous lake bed that had been dry for 50 years. So this is more evidence of this very unusual rain. This is taken from space by NASA satellites. A satellite is a man-made machine, basically, that we send up on a rocket to go around, to orbit the Earth, and to do stuff, often to take pictures for science, to carry communication for cell phones, to act as a satellite for a GPS system. So this is a scientific instrument in space taking pictures of the Earth, and it showed water rushing, sort of flowing back, flooding back into the basin of Lake Iriki. When we say a basin of something, think of your sink at home, the kitchen sink or the bathroom sink. That sort of bowl-shaped structure that the sink actually is, the bowl part of it, so not the taps where the water comes out or anything, but just that bowl-shaped area where the water collects, where you wash your hands or face. That's a basin. So if you take a lake or a pond and you kind of empty the water out, what's left, that depression, that kind of lower area in the land where the water will flow and build up and collect, that is the basin, giving us the idea that Lake Iriki was kind of a dry lake until this rain happened, and suddenly it was a lake that was back in business. This is a famous lake bed or basin, and it had been dry for 50 years. Well, that was until the rains came.
Right, of course, people consider Taipei as a basin. It's a large area surrounded by mountains. So when it does rain, sometimes we have floods in Taipei. But again, we've got the basin of this lake, and a bunch of water went into this lake, even though it had been dry for 50 years. Imagine that. Okay, let's move on now to the second part of our lesson. We'll listen to it first, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
It's been 30 to 50 years since we've had this much rain in such a short space of time, said Hussein Ouabeb, an official from Morocco's meteorology agency. Meteorologists believe that the rain stemmed from broader changes in global weather patterns. These changes, driven by climate change, have made extreme climate events more frequent. Ouabeb explained that additional moisture in the air may continue to affect the Sahara's weather in the coming months and years, possibly leading to more storms. All right, so we've already heard about some of the facts of what's going on with this rain in the Sahara Desert of Morocco. Let's hear from a government official who has a bit more information to kind of put some perspective on this, to give us an idea of just how incredibly unusual this is. Back in our article, we read it's been 30 to 50 years. So those are the decades we talked about. It's been a long time. We get a bit more precise. It's been 30 to 50 years since we've had this much rain in such a short space of time. And things that happen in the natural world every 30 or 50 years are not exactly common and normal. And this is from a gentleman named Hussein Ouabeb. He's an official from Morocco's meteorology agency. Okay, so he's kind of a professional scientific weatherman. Meteorology is the study of weather and climate and weather patterns, winds, storms, all that kind of stuff. If you're watching the news and they're telling you the weather, they might say, this is our meteorologist, and they're going to give us the weekend weather. In other words, a weather expert, a weather scientist. So he knows what he's talking about, and he knows a basic timeline, 30 to 50 years, about that since we've had this much rain in such a short space of time. In other words, so quickly over such a little amount of time.
Right, so remember the word meteorology. It's kind of a hard word to say, and I'm having difficulty myself saying this word. So if you can't say it, just say their weather agency. People will know what you're actually talking about. So meteorologists believe that the rains stemmed from broader changes in global weather patterns. Okay, so if something stems from something, that is its origin, that's where it came from, that's the cause of something. So they basically believe that the cause of this is due to broader changes in global weather patterns. So global weather is changing around the world. Most scientists believe it's because of global warming or climate change. Some people think it's probably due to sunspots or something like that. There's various explanations, but most scientists believe it's because of global warming. Maybe they'll get back to normal in the near future.
We can only hope. But yes, indeed, we've had some very late typhoons here in Taiwan, right? Happening even at the end of October, November. That's kind of unusual too. It says these changes and many other we've seen around the world, these changes driven by climate change have made extreme climate events more frequent. This is what scientists told us would happen 10, 20 years ago when we first started to get worried about climate change. It will make the world warmer, yes, in some places, but it will also make things colder. It will make the weather less predictable, and the weather will be doing things it doesn't normally do. That kind of idea. There may be fewer storms, but the storms we get will be much more powerful, much more intense. Extreme climate events will become more frequent. So heavy rains, floods, big snowstorms, big typhoons with powerful winds, tornadoes, and that kind of thing. No matter where you are in the world, you'll find that weather patterns are changing, and things that used to be less common are now happening much more frequently. Ouabeb explained that additional moisture in the air may continue to affect the Sahara's weather in the coming months and years, possibly leading to more storms. Often with these changes, we talk about the new normal, the way things have changed from how they used to be. How they are now, it's not going to go back to the way they used to be. This is the new normal. So this additional moisture in the air is wetter. Of course, the air over the Sahara is probably some of the driest air in the world. Very few clouds and moisture up there in the atmosphere. But it's wetter now. So this is going to cause changes in the Sahara's weather and the weather patterns in the near and the long term, in the coming months and years, possibly leading to more storms. So this could happen again. If you live in the Sahara, might be time to buy a rowboat.
Yeah, you'll have to make some adjustments. Maybe it's a good thing because, of course, in the desert, they don't get a lot of water. Now you've got a lot of water. Maybe you can grow crops or something like that. But for the most part, it's probably trouble because you'll have all these floods, which will destroy people's lives and take away their cattle and destroy their homes. So it's not a good thing. And, of course, it probably will continue into the future. Okay, we're at the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's listen to the third and final part.
On the plus side, the heavy Saharan rains helped refill reservoirs drained by 6 years of drought. However, the extent of the rain's positive effects remains uncertain.
第三部分看到名词 reservoir， 它的意思是水库、蓄水池，也可以是储备或是储藏的意思。例如 The city relies on several reservoirs to supply clean water to its residents. 该市仰赖着数个水库供应居民干净的水。再看一个例子 After the rainy season, the reservoir was nearly filled to capacity. 雨季过后，水库几乎都满了。再来我们看到名词 drought， 指的是干旱或是旱灾。举例来说 Drought is a problem in many parts of Africa. 干旱是非洲许多地区的一个问题。最后看到名词 extent， 它表示程度，也可以是范围或是面积。可以说 The overall extent of the damage from the earthquake is still unclear. 地震造成的总体破坏程度尚不清楚。最后一句 The officials are still investigating the full extent of the damage caused by the fire. 官员们仍在调查这场火灾造成的完整损害范围。
So we're talking about a dire situation here in Morocco and maybe other parts of the Sahara Desert in northern Africa. That's bad. It's a negative. But on the plus side, you could also say on the bright side, the heavy Saharan rains helped refill reservoirs drained by 6 years of drought. That sounds kind of like a similar situation to Taiwan. I think early last year there was a drought for maybe 4 or 5 months, and then finally the typhoons started coming and filled up the reservoirs. So this is on the plus side in Morocco here, the rains or the periods of rain during this time. They refilled the reservoirs. Just like Taiwan, they have reservoirs there, large areas where water is stored above ground, like the Shimen Reservoir and other ones as well. And yes, indeed, when you put water back into something after that thing is empty, you refill it, okay? So you might refill your prescription, of course, if you are getting medicine from the pharmacy and you have to go back every month for some new medications, you're refilling your prescription.
Yes, and as Roger said, of course, reservoirs, kind of like man-made lakes that are supposed to collect water near cities for people to use and drink and wash in their homes and businesses. So these need to be refilled, right? After periods of dry weather when it doesn't rain, they will lose water, right? They will drop in their levels, and then they get refilled. They get more water in the form of rain, usually, that happens later. But when there is no rain for a long period of time, we call that a drought. A drought is when rain that should fall doesn't fall. An area that should have a certain amount of rain every year is not reaching those numbers, and it can get so bad that, of course, crops can die, farm animals can die, and humans can end up being forced from their homes because there simply isn't water around to drink or live off of. So drought can be a big problem. A lot of that, again, goes back to climate change. However, it says the extent of the rain's positive effects remains uncertain. So if you want to look at the bright side of these sudden rainfalls in the Sahara Desert, it's very strange, it's a little worrying. But yes, it makes drought less of a problem, right? As Roger said, it allows farmers maybe to grow crops, and certainly the people there to worry less about where to get drinking water from. But the extent of the rain's positive effects, how far the good side of this goes, remains remains uncertain. If it leads to flooding, if it leads to disease or things like that in the form of malaria, maybe where it hasn't been seen before, this could be a problem. The extent of something is basically kind of the range of it, the size of it, or how big or small it can be. If we talk about the size of a farm, this farm is 200 acres or 150 hectares. We're kind of talking about the extent of that, how big the city is. It's 20 miles across or something like that. The size of it, basically, how much it covers or how large it is, how far it reaches as well. So how far these positive effects will go is unknown, as is the extent of the rain's negative effects too, because, of course, floods and other things can be very serious problems.
Okay, we're at the end of our discussion for today. Here comes our Chinese teacher, Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分有一句提到，根据摩洛哥政府的说法，仅仅2天的降雨量在几个地区就超过了每年约250毫米的平均值。文中它用到片语介系词 according to 来表达根据什么什么。那我们来整理它的不同意思。好，第一个就是课文的用法，可以表达根据什么所说，依照什么什么所记载。那么后面可以接人或事物，用来说明来源或是出处。举例来说 According to the article, teenagers should get 9 to 10 hours of sleep per night. 根据那篇文章，青少年每晚需要9到10小时的睡眠。好，那么第二个意思是表达依照，像是依照什么的指示，后面常常会接规则或是说明。例如Ian put the toy together according to the directions on the box. Ian 按照盒子上的说明把玩具组装起来。那第三个意思是表达取决于什么什么，或是根据什么所定。那么后面常常会接某一种分类评量的标准，像是 They arranged the books according to size. 他们根据书本大小来排列书籍。好，另外课文有用到动词 exceed 来表达超出、超过或是超越。那我们来学一下它的字首字根。看到 CEED 或是 CESS 或者 CEDE 这一类的字根，它有 go 的意思，也就是前进、行走。那它还有退让、投降、放弃等等的意思。在 exceed 这个字当中，它的字首 EX 表示由内向外， CEED 表示行进。那同学们可以试着联想，由内而外走出去，向外去发展，那就会胜过留在原地的人，超越了那些人。所以 exceed 它就有超过、胜过或是凌驾的意思。我们顺便补充几个有这一类字根的单字。第一个，我们先来看看带有 CEED 这个字根的例子，像 proceed， 它的字首 PRO 表示 forward， 向前，那么 seed 这部分表示 go， 所以合在一起 proceed 就是 go forward， 朝着什么前进，它也有继续做某事啊，继续进行的意思。我们再来看到带有 CESS 这个字根的例子，像 necessary， 它的字首 NE 表示否定，字根 CESS 表示放弃， ARY 是形容词字尾。那不得放弃的东西就表示它是必要的、必须的。好，第三个来看带有 CEDE 这个字根的例子，像 recede， 它的字首 RE 表示 back 向后，字根 CEDE 表示 go 行进行走，那么合在一起 recede 它就有后退、渐渐远去的意思。好，那以上今天的重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Rainfall. The sudden rainfall surprised everyone at the outdoor event. Exceed. Robert's performance exceeded the expectations of his manager. Satellite. The satellite was launched to monitor global weather changes. Basin. Animals often gather in the basin during the dry season to find water. Reservoir. The city built a new reservoir to ensure a steady water supply. Drought. Many farmers lost their crops due to the severe drought. Extent. They did not know the extent of the problem until they began investigating.
Discussion Starter starts now!
It's time now for our discussion starter, and the question is, can you think of other instances where extreme weather events have shown the effects of climate change?
Well, another example of an extreme weather event due to climate change is the common ice storms that people get now in different parts of North America, especially during the winter time. I mean, we used to have a clear marker between sort of rainfall and snow. Now, with the temperatures being so different and changing so quickly, having big ice storms like the one back in the late 90s that kind of knocked out power to a quarter of Canada, those can be pretty extreme, pretty expensive, and take a long time to recover from. So yeah, that's a good example, I'd say.
I think it's a good example as well, but similar to the Sahara rainfall, other climate change-related events include tornadoes. I believe there's an area of the United States called Tornado Alley, which extends from Texas all the way up to Manitoba in Canada. And it seems to me I've heard reports of tornadoes occurring in other parts of the world more often, not just in Tornado Alley. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Mike.
See you next time.